Hello everybody, how you doing? This is my second video in relation to one-step problems involving multiplication and division. My first video dealt with simpler problems where we have a whole number, either a positive or negative, times a variable equal to a value, and how do you solve for x in this situation or for the variable in this situation. It's the same idea as we did there, but down here this just looks more challenging because I have decimals in here. I also have fractions. So how do you handle solving for a variable or solving for x if you have a decimal or a fraction? Now these problems involve only step 4. So step 4 is use multiplication or division to cancel out the coefficient in front of the variable. So I have 0.3 times x equals 6. Well, how do you cancel out that 0.3 in front of it? Well, since it's multiplying by x in the first place, you do the opposite. You divide by 0.3. And what that does is it sets up a fraction where you have 0.3 over 0.3, and that simplifies out to be just 1. So we end up with just x on the left side. And on the right side, we have 6 divided by 0.3. And if I take 6 divided by 0.3, oops, the glare there, sorry, it'll get you your answer. So 20 is the answer in this particular case. So again, the idea is if you're multiplying a number or you have this coefficient in front of the variable, it's multiplying, so the opposite will cancel it out. So you divide by that number and you'll actually solve the problem. But I'm a big fan of checking your answers. So if I were to actually take 0.3 and multiply it by 20, that should equal 6. And so I'm just going to use my calculator here to solve this particular case. I'm not going to try to do this in my head or write it out. So 0.3 times 20 does equal 6. So the left side equals the right side. That's what I need to happen here for me to make this work. And again, the idea is we're trying to solve for what number times this coefficient will equal 6. In that case, it's 20 in this particular problem. So if we look at number 5, similar situation except we have a negative decimal. So, but we're going to solve it the same way. I'm going to end up dividing by negative 0.5 both sides. And again, the whole point is I want to cancel out this negative 0.5 in front of this x to get the x by itself. So if you take a number and you divide it by itself, it just simplifies down to 1. So we have 1 times x, which is just x. And then I'm going to take 15 divided by negative 0.5, and that results in a negative 30. So apparently negative 30 is the number that if I multiply by negative 0.5 will equal 15. But let's check that out. So I'm going to take my original problem and substitute in what I got for x and see if it equals 15. If it does, I did it right. If it doesn't, then I made a mistake somewhere. So negative 0.5 times negative 30, that equals 15. So that does check out to be correct. So that's pretty sweet. So the next particular problem, it's a fraction as a coefficient. It's 1 over 4 as my coefficient times x equals 8. So this is a unique situation. Some people take it and solve this in a couple different ways. What I always do is I always multiply by the opposite, or sorry, by the reciprocal. So if I take my original fraction, so my original fraction is 1/4, and I were to flip it, that's what you call the reciprocal. And if you multiply a number by its reciprocal, what you do is you multiply the numerator by the numerator. So 1 times 4 is 4. And then the denominator by the denominator. So 4 times 1 is 4. And then notice what happens. Any number over itself equals 1. So whenever you multiply a fraction by its reciprocal, it essentially cancels out that fraction and giving you a 1. So here, I'm going to take this 1/4 x and I'm going to multiply all that by, I'll just do this. We'll multiply the coefficient. Ignore that that parentheses there. And I'll multiply this by the reciprocal. But what I do to one side, I've got to do the other side, right? So I'm going to do 4 over 1 times 8. So we're multiplying both sides by 4 over 1. Sorry, that's a little ugly there. And again, 4 times 1 is 4. 1 times 4 is 4, and we have x. And then we end up with 4 over 1 equals 8, but 8 can be converted to a fraction by just putting it over 1. So when I multiply my numerator by my numerator, 4 times 8 gives me 32. And then 1 times 1 is 1. And then this simplifies down very nicely. And sorry, I'm kind of squashing this in. So the 4 over 4 cancels out, leaving just an x. And then the 32 over 1 is just 32. So 32 is the answer in this particular problem. So how do I check my answer here? Well, I'm going to take 1/4 times 32, and that should equal 8. And you can multiply this in your calculator or just do 1 over 4 times 32 over 1. Either way, you will see that it will balance out. I'm just going to do the calculator here to keep this simple. So 1 divided by 4 times 32. Does that equal 8? It does. So I have 8 equals 8. So that checks out, and so that's the right answer. And then the very last problem we have here, it's very similar. It looks more challenging, but it really isn't. So if I look here, we have 5 over 3. So I'm going to take that reciprocal. So I'm going to write down 5 over 3x equals 12. And what you do is you just multiply that fraction by the reciprocal, which is going to be 3 over 5. So 3 over 5. And again, what you do to one side of the equation, you have to do the other. And if you multiply 3 by 5, you get 15. And then 5 times 3 is also 15. So the fractions have combined, and we have the x. And then 3 over 5 times 12, well, that's really 12 over 1. So 3 times 12 is 36. And 5 times 1 is 5. And this simplifies down because the 15 over 15 just becomes 1, which is just 1 times x, which is x. And then 36 over 5, let's see what that becomes. That gives me a decimal, which is fine. Decimals just mean it's a number, right? So that can happen. And so that is the answer to this particular problem. Now lastly, I'm going to actually plug into 7.2 into this equation and see if it balances out. So I'm going to take my original problem, 5 over 3 times 7.2, and see if it gives me 12. If it gives me 12, then I know 7.2 has to be the right answer here. So 5 divided by 3 times 7.2, that equals 12. So I know that 7.2 has to be correct. Sorry I got a little messy here, but the idea is you just take the fraction, multiply it by the reciprocal, and then you'll get your answer. So hopefully this helps you out. If you have any questions, please come to tutoring or make any comments on this video. Have a good day. Bye-bye.